One of them, his grandson, lived in town. The two granddaughters lived out of state. As Ed's life was coming to a close, these three grandchildren and his legacy that he wanted to leave for them became his world. Discerning how to assure them that they were important and that they had his everlasting love became for Ed his bucket list. That year, whenever I was going out of town for a few days, I always checked in with Ed before leaving. Both of us knowing it might well be our final visit. And when I returned from vacations, the first call I made was to Ed, checking on his status. During that year, Ed had built each of his two young granddaughters beautiful dollhouses, about yay high. The kind with the open back so that you could reach in and decorate each room to your heart's content. They were beautiful. Not because they looked beautiful, though they were. They were beautiful because these were the gifts of love and time spent creating for each grandchild the perfect gift. The gift that would convey his feelings for each of them. Each nail, each glued seam, each step of their construction was an act of love. Ed had intended to build his grandson a barn on the similar motif. But time and cancer took its toll, and he was not able to do that. The week before he died, we had a conversation about that unfinished agenda item. And from that conversation, there grew up in Ed the perfect answer. He was a fisherman, and he had spent many an hour in the summertime in a small rowboat on which he had attached a small outboard trolling motor. And on many of those fishing occasions, his grandson had spent the afternoon with him in the boat. It was the boat that was to become the gift to his grandson. On the morning I received the phone call, I arrived at Ed's home around 8 a.m. His wife invited me in, and then she left us alone for a while. She spent most of the day in the kitchen. A short time later, Ed's daughter and grandson, who lived in town, arrived at the home. After greeting his grandfather, the grandson went out into the yard to play, and Ed's daughter and I kept vigil at his bedside. I sat at the foot of the bed. She sat at the head. Ed was, for the most part, slipping in and out of consciousness. But I spent the time listening to his daughter, recalling what it was like growing up having Ed for a father. And from time to time, the bedroom door would open and his grandson would appear at the door and gaze in to see how Grandpa was doing, and then he would head back out to play. A few times when that happened, Ed would rally in response to his grandson's presence, only quickly to return to his semi-conscious state once the door was closed. But on one occasion, the grandson came running all the way into the room, hopped up on the bed, pried pried open his grandpa's eyes and looked in there and said in a loud voice, "Grandpa, are you still there?" After Ed responded, the grandson hopped down and went back out into the yard. I left the family around noon, assuring them that I was only a phone call away. And after dinner, I returned to join the family in their vigil. And by then, the son-in-law had arrived, and a short while later, Ed passed away. And I stayed with them while we waited for the funeral home to come and pick up his body. When the body was removed, the grandson was sent to bed while the rest of the family retired to the kitchen, where I joined them. And as the evening wore on, the grandson kept finding excuses to come out of the bedroom and into the kitchen, to the point where his father was getting visibly annoyed. And it was at that point that I decided to intervene. And I said to the grandson's father, I said, "You know, all of the adults who have suffered a huge loss today are gathered here together in the kitchen to comfort and to console one another and to remember Ed. Your little son has also experienced a huge loss today. He has lost his grandfather. But you have banished him into a dark bedroom to be by himself. Who is he going to work out his loss with? Or does he simply have to stuff down all of those feelings and live with being disconnected from the family, with not belonging? I admired the father because, having said that, he got up and went into the bedroom, picked up his son, and brought him out into the kitchen. And within less than 5 minutes, the little boy was fast asleep, curled up in the corner, totally content and at ease. He mattered. He belonged. We all stayed in the kitchen until the coffee pot was drained and the cookies were gone. And finally, at long last, the appetite for talking about Ed was sated. But we sat there basking in the warmth of each other's presence, sharing how all of our lives were enriched by being in relationship to one another and connected through this man that we all love. You see, when you begin at the end, you come into the full presence of that abundant life that Jesus came to bring us. And you become acutely aware that the abundant life is not about having things or accumulating stuff. The abundant life revealed in Jesus is about being in relationship. It's not the mystery of the missing socks that is important, but rather it's knowing that you matter. knowing that you belong. Ed's legacy to his grandchildren was letting each one of them know that they belonged, that they mattered, that they were important. Beginning at the end is all about relationships. One of my favorite phrases from one of the statements of absolution in a previous hymnal, when we had confession of sins and we would hear the words of absolution, this phrase was in there. We prayed that God would grant us time for amendment of life. Now, I suppose in the larger context, that could take on many different meanings. Time to straighten myself up, time to fly right, time to get rid of all my bad habits. But what I really think it's all about is time for healing of relationships, time for reconciliation with those with whom we are estranged. And the circle widens, first with family, then with community, then with the world. You see, because in the final analysis, we all belong to each other. We are in this together. And maybe if we start at the end, we will remember in our daily lives what is really important. And I'm convinced that it is the older members of society who not only teach us how to live, they also teach us how to die. And how to make sense of the unity between life and death. And how to love life without fearing death. Ed made that abundantly clear to me when I was just a snot-nosed little tyke out of seminary, with my whole career ahead of me. He was perhaps my most important teacher in my journey of life.